Ask the Podcast Coach for February 8th, 2025.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, and joining me right over there is the one and only. Hey, look, I didn't update that screen. Great. It's not Jim Collison. That is the one and only Glenn Hebert from the Horse Radio Network. Glenn, how's it going?
I could never be Jim Collison. I could never do it. He's too good.
How's it going, buddy?
Good. Hey, before we do anything else, there's something that I have to do for you before we even do the pour or any of that.
Okay. And a horse whinny, even better.
That's our official birthday on Horses in the Morning. So happy birthday, Dave.
Yeah, we've got a lot of that going on in the chat room. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Rich. Yeah, it's the big 6-0, and I'm not happy about it. I mean, I'm okay, but it's just one of those things. If you get bored later, there's a great song by John Mayer called "Stop This Train," and it's all about I don't want to watch my parents get old. Like, you know, just getting old in general. Like, there's really some good things about it. And there are other things that are not so good about it. And there's one line where he says, he talked to my old man. He said, help me understand. And holy cow, we got super chats rolling in. That's great fun.
That's a big super chat, Ralph.
That is holy cow. So
good job, Ralph.
Thank you, Ralph, from AskRalphPodcast.com or just AskRalph.com if you're lazy and don't want to type in the word podcast. But yeah, he says, when you turn 68, you try to renegotiate. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that. But there will be cake. There will be Luigi's Pizza later on today. And, you know.
And I'm proud to say that I ate Luigi's Pizza with you in person.
Yeah.
And it is very good. It is very good.
It's very unique. I love it. And now, Glenn is not a coffee drinker. But you did say you have some tea of some sort.
I have iced tea as my drink of choice. So
there you go. All right.
Let me put it on camera here somehow. There we go.
Yeah. Let's watch him.
Are you ready?
Dump it. Yeah, we're ready. He dumps it all over his, board or something,
Keyboard.
And flames go in things. So, and that is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. In fact, if you go to podcastwebsitetips.com, that is the pod page. Podcast. Mark is a guest on there. And, I've used him for a ton of stuff, whether it's been artwork for the School of Podcasting or this very show, Ask the Podcast Coach, Podcast Hot Seat. He's done over 500 pieces of artwork for people. But wait, there's more. He does more than just artwork. He'll do your whole stinking website. He will do a PDF if you got a lead magnet, anything that, is going to get in front of the public. You want Mark on that because you only get one first impression, and he's going to sit down with you, not like some guy on Fiverr. He's going to sit down with you. He's going to listen to your podcast. It's all about the personal touch to make sure that your brand is in alignment with your show. So when it comes time to look professional, there's only one place to go, and that is, of course, podcastbranding.co. Tell him Dave and Glenn and Jim sent you. And he's polite because he's a Canadian, which is, an even added bonus. And we also want to give a shout out to my buddy Dan over on Based on a True Story Podcast.com. It's funny because Dan he now owns this space in my head. Anytime, you start to watch a movie, the screen goes black and white letters appear that say, based on a true story. And you're like, huh. And what Dan has done is it's great. It's a combination of like history, but entertainment. And so all these movies that you come up and you're like, oh, and then you find out, well, that's not really what happened. And so if you're a history buff, but also a movie buff, well, it's like a Reese cup. It's entertainment and history all together. Check him out, Based on a True Story podcast.
I've listened since episode 1, Dave.
Really?
On this show. Yeah, I've chatted with him via email and told him that I absolutely love his show. He does a terrific job with that show.
He does.
And it's a couple hundred episodes in now. So
there you go.
I love
even better.
Show.
So
Todd the Gator came through.
Todd the Gator. Yes, he did. Holy cow. Thank you very much for that. Holy
Geez, I need
cow.
to do live shows on my birthday. You make money, apparently.
Apparently, that's it.
How to monetize your podcast.
That's it. Actually, did I say I was 60? I'm 70. Yes, that's it. Whatever the number of people are chipping in here. I'm actually 450 years old. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. So this is going to be fun. But the one thing I want to ask you, Glenn. Now we're going to, as
Yeah.
always, throw your questions in the chat room, or if you want to, of course, it says it right up there. AskThePodcastCoach.com/question. You have, a Patreon account. You call them auditors. And you have how many? A lot.
About 600 in there.
That's a lot. And so my question that everybody wants to know is like, how'd you do that? Like, what's your pitch when it comes time to talk about your crowdfunding?
What's changed? We started with Patreon when it started. So I don't know how many years ago that is now, but we started when it started. And we always thought it was about the merch that, they would sign up for certain levels based on the mug or the t-shirt or the sticker, right?
Right.
And I was absolutely wrong about that. And this year we're eliminating all of that. We're taking all that merch stuff away because that's not why they sign up. They sign up to be part of the community. And we make a big deal. That happy birthday you heard with the horse whinny at the end?
Right.
On our daily show, we do daily happy birthdays for the auditors. And I know when their birthdays are because I'm Facebook friends with all of them. So that's how I know when their birthdays are. So we do their birth. It's a big deal. If I miss one of their birthdays, I hear about it because
I bet.
you don't miss one of their birthdays. So we get them involved in the show in many different ways. It's easier for us because we have a daily show, so we can do that. It makes it a little bit easier to get them involved. But when we do polls, which we do all the time about horse stuff, when we have a couple of segments that we do that it's all based on auditor responses, and they hear their names on the show constantly. So our auditors join. I ask every auditor that joins why they join, and we call them auditors because in the horse show world, when you're doing a clinic, if you're not riding in the clinic and you're paying to watch, you're an auditor. So you're paying to watch the clinic, you're an auditor. Kind of makes sense. You're listening to our show, you're an auditor.
See, that's smart.
That's why we did it. Yeah.
A lot of people, I know Jonathan Oakes over at Trivial Warfare. He has the Trivial Warfare, is the key word here, Army. And depending on the different levels, you're a general or a private or a lieutenant or captain or whatever. Then they each have different things. So anytime you're doing that, holy cow. We've got another one coming in. Thank you so much. Craig from AI Goes to College. Do we mention?
Wow, you're doing all right.
I'm doing okay. Yeah, holy cow. But anytime you can tie that into the show, it's a little icing on the cake. And in your case, it makes total sense. Like you said, they pay to watch. So, but do you ask people to join, or is it just?
Yeah, well, this is how we do it. When we do the birthdays, we'll throw in, if you want to become an auditor, this is how you join. It's very short and quick. So it's when we do auditor related things that we promote it, and it's very short and quick. And the reason everybody gives me is the fear of being left out. They listen to the show, they hear about auditors all the time, or we'll talk. The other key to that was giving them a place to go where they could all become a family. So we started a private Facebook group because our community lives on Facebook. Yours may live somewhere else, but ours lives on Facebook. It tends to be where horse people are. So we gave them a place from the very beginning. They have their own private Facebook group. They have to be a paid auditor. The minute they stop paying to be an auditor, they get booted. So they're in there, they're communicating. They are a family. It's one of the most active places I've ever seen. There's like 30, 40 posts a day in there. And
wow.
It's interesting because we had a very difficult decision to make at the very beginning. And Dave, you'll appreciate this. Somebody in the auditor room, instead of talking about horses or our shows or whatever, started talking about their divorce. We don't allow politics or religion. Those two.
Okay, I was going to say. I thought you were going to say politics, and I'm like, oh,
and
that's
we'll boot them. And it's a politics-free zone.
Yeah,
and they're very good about that because they want it to be a politics-free zone. But somebody asked about their own divorce, and we were like, okay, do we allow them to talk about non-horse things?
Right.
And we made the decision early on to allow them to talk about anything they wanted. And that was the best decision we ever made because now they truly are a family. They help each other out. There's 25 subgroups that they've created off the auditor group now. And one of them's mental health. And there's about 100 of them in the mental health group. And they're helping each other in there all the time. So there's a subgroup for almost anything you can think of, and there. That's where they take the conversation that we don't want to clutter up the main room, because it's a very specific conversation. They do it in the subgroups. So
Interesting.
it really is a family, and and we include them in almost everything that we do. And I do special content for them. That's the other thing that we do on our daily show. We do an extra 15 minutes every day. That's just for the auditor feed. So they have their own feed, and
Oh,
they get the
nice.
extra 15 minutes. And that's not safe for work. That's adult conversation. Jamie tends to swear a lot in that. So
There you go.
but and then I do special video things in the auditor room too. So we do give them special content. So they come, fear of being left out, and special content is why they're there. They're not there for a mug or a T-shirt.
Well, the other thing you've been doing this forever, right? You've over, 5,000 episodes, 6,000 episodes of just horses in the morning. You've interviewed 6,000 guests. This is the one you've done 9,000 commercials, at least. How
At
do
least,
you
I don't.
now? Obviously they're not all the same sponsor, but some of them. Do you still have the woman? I remember when
Yes.
you started the network, it was your very first sponsor.
Yep.
Some
We had
feed
12
thing.
listeners then.
Yeah. And so, do you still do spots for her?
Yes, and she's advertised. She's our biggest sponsor on 4 shows. So she does 4 different shows. She's our biggest sponsor. Pretty much, tens of thousands a year. And she just retired, actually, and the company is keeping on doing their sponsorship. She's visiting me next week. She's coming to town and going to stop in. So
See, that's a total Glenn Hebert thing. You know what I mean? It's all about the community, hanging out with people. You went on tour, for Christ's sake. I remember that.
yeah. That's when I stopped. Last time I was on the show. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you any plans of doing that in the future? That looked like fun, but it also looked like it might have been a lot of work.
Yeah, we did 6 weeks. We visited 14 different listener farms. We actually took our RV and stayed at their farms for 3 or 4 days each, and we did meetups at each farm. And we were in 14 states when we did that. That was tiring. That was very tiring. We're going to do less traveling now. We're doing our last Horse Lovers Cruise next year. So that'll be our final Horse Lovers Cruise too next year. We're going to do Alaska next year. This will be our 6th or 7th cruise that we've done. But the meetups, we've done over 100 meetups across the country over the years too. And that's the most fun, getting to meet the listeners and having fun. Staying at their farms was really cool too, and meeting their horses and hanging out.
Well, it's it is the Horse Radio Network. So horses have to be in there somewhere, I would think.
That's right.
But yeah, I always say when you can tell me the color of your audience's eyes, you're in the right spot. That's always a good thing. And then did you have any, probably not, but did anything change with your show after doing that? Because that's where you really get the feedback, I would think. Maybe. I don't know if people are brave enough to give you any kind of notes.
Well,
They're probably
that,
go ahead.
we do it for that. I would say it's our focus group. And I don't think this is underutilized in the podcasting world.
Yeah.
If you have a place where where your listeners are, so what was that like? Scott Johnson has a very active Facebook group. Off of that, he could make a focus group. Off of our auditors, our Patreon, we have a focus group. It's 20 people who volunteer every 6 months. This is a daily show. Okay. So they volunteer to give us feedback on every episode. And we have a separate private Facebook group. The only people in there are my co-host and I and my boss. And those are the only people in that room, and they comment on every episode. So they're obligated by promise to be honest. They like the guest, they like us that day. We said something stupid we shouldn't have said. Whatever it is, they have to give us feedback on every episode. So for every episode we do, I get 10 to 20 people giving feedback. It's the most important thing we've ever done, because we have changed the show based on what they've said. And it's Dave, when you get feedback for something, there's always both ends. You get this end and that end, right? The right and the left, or the top and the bottom, or whatever, the extremes. I never take a look at the one-offs. I always take a look at, if I get comments in the focus group, one person didn't like it, one person liked it, what are people in the middle saying? And if they're all agreeing that that particular segment sucked, right? Then I pay attention. I don't pay attention necessarily. I listen, but I don't change things because of the extreme ends. But I
Right.
take a look at the middle, and if they're all agreeing, then it's like, okay, we have to talk about this. Sometimes we're doing that segment because we want to do it, and it's for us, right? It's
Right.
for our satisfaction. We've done 3,600 episodes on Horses in the Morning. We have to keep it interesting for us too.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's a
One of
long
my,
time.
I went to a Sammy Hagar concert. He actually came to Akron, Ohio. We have this really cool kind of mid-sized theater, and he came out, and he'd played for like 2 hours, and it's encore time. And he comes out and starts playing Led Zeppelin, and then he did a song by The Who, and he said, "If you're wondering why I'm not playing my stuff," he goes, "This is like show number like whatever 30 of 80." And I won't say what he said, but he said, "Look, man, if I get bored, we're all
It's
blanked."
true.
Yeah. So,
It's
and I was
true, though,
like,
right?
that's a good point, you know? So, yeah. Now, do you have, because I know at one point you had 17 different shows, I'm guessing. It was a lot on the network.
There's 32 active on the network.
Oh my,
So
that's amazing. So you have different audiences, and I know Horses in the Morning is kind of like everybody comes together. It's kind of where,
catch all.
yeah. So, because Ralph does a show, his niche is finance. Ralph has been doing taxes forever, since he was like, I don't know, 4. And it's a family business, and he's now taken over. And so his niche is Christian finance. And so he says, how do you handle the situation when you have two distinct audiences? For me, I have a ton of business owners as listeners, but I also have many individuals trying to alternate content ideas. So do you have anything like that with horse stuff?
Well, we tend to break off I would in his case, if I had the bandwidth or the hosts or whatever, I would do 2 different shows because they are 2 different audiences. That's what I would do with it. That's probably what you would do with it too, because you like starting shows. But
That is,
uh,
if stand next to me for 20 minutes, I will start a new podcast.
that's right. In his, and I'm not sure what he's asking. If he's asking in relationship to the Patreon or the focus group, if he's asking that in relation to the focus group, then I would still seek out. I would just have them both in one focus group,
Yeah.
and then I would pay attention to what they say. You'll know which one they are, right? So I would pay attention to what they're saying individually. That also might decide. Oh, that's right. Ralph does daily, doesn't he?
Yeah, that'd be insane.
No, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So,
I think he's talking about the show, and I have the same problem where I have people who are thinking of starting a podcast,
mm,
and then I have most of my audience is already launched and they want to grow it. And so what I do is anytime I do something that is very podcasting 101, I announce it at the beginning and I say, hey, this show today is for this kind of person. And so if that's you, hang around. If it's not, you're dismissed, and I don't do a ton of those because, and this is where, again, getting feedback from your audience, like Ralph, you might want to make that one of your custom questions because he's using Podpage for the survey is, are you a business owner or an individual or both? Because I found that most of my audience already is launched. They're more in it for the growth. They're in it for how do I make this good, that kind of stuff. So primarily that's where a lot of my content is. And I throw in stuff that, and then the other thing I have, just in different audiences, is I have some people that are just audio, and I have some people that are just video. They're YouTubers, and then I have people that are doing both. And so, like last week, I did an episode on a report that came out from YouTube about what makes good content. And I said at the beginning, I'm like, now this is from a video company. I go, and there are some video aspects. I go, but a lot of it is just like what makes good content. I said, so if you're an audio person, stick around. It's a really interesting report because they're talking about things like, don't be afraid to be yourself and, be personal and share stories. And the fact that it's not the tech, they're like, this is what people expect. Clear video that I can see you. It's like, this isn't going to work if where's my off button? Right? So this is not good video. Hi, welcome to Ask the Podcast Coach, because I just turned off my lights for those that are listening.
That's great for the Creepy Dave podcast.
It is
That
for
would be perfect.
welcome to the Creepy Dave podcast. I was in the woods and I heard a sound. Yeah. So they want clear video and they want clear audio. So the whole that's not going to work anymore either. But once you get those, that's kind of like a given. And from there, it's like, is it relevant? Like I told the story of Don Miller. I love Don Miller's books, but he has one about coaching. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best. I'm a coach. And all of his examples are like, okay, to make $100,000, you sell a $10,000 product for 10 people. And I'm like, yeah, my top product is $99 a month. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not going to make 10 grand. So it's not relevant to me. So you got to have relevant content, things like that. But so that's an example of how I do it. I just, if I know, Ralph, if you're doing a show and this is really going to only apply to business owners, just flag it up front. And I know the knee-jerk reaction is like, well, yeah, but then the personal people are going to tune out. Yeah, and you save their time. They'll be grateful for that, because I always just kind of do the thing where do the podcast that I want in a way. And so if I'm doing things and, I know they're going to waste my time, and it's not wasting time. It's just I'm talking to a slightly different audience, and I know that's weird, but
Well, and with the Daily Show, we're an hour 5 days a week, right?
Yeah.
So we do 5 segments, at least 5 segments in each show. So our guests are 10 to 15 minutes. They're never more than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I always want the audience wanting more, not less, of a guest. We're there to get them to go read the book or do whatever the reason the guest is on. But so we know that we have all levels of riders on the show, and they know that if they don't want to listen to this particular segment because it's over their head or they know it all, right? They already got that. They're just going to skip ahead. So, that's why we do timestamps, right? So people, if we didn't want them to skip ahead, we wouldn't do timestamps. So we know people are going to skip ahead on certain things. And with the Daily Show, I want to give them the ability to do that. They're more likely to come back the next time than if they feel like they have to trudge through stuff they don't want to listen to. So with a show like his, if you have a segment that's for the end user or the taxpayer, and then you have a segment that's for tax preparers, they're going to skip what they don't want to listen to anyway. But if you're giving them the option, and in our case, we do it in in every episode, we give them the options to either hang around or leave. The biggest complaint that you'll always get when you've been around a long time, and Dave can attest to this, that when we do our polls, and we do them quite often, when we do our polls, the biggest complaint we get is that Jamie's been my co-host, by the way, for all 15 years.
Yeah.
The biggest complaint that we get is we have too many guests and there's not enough us.
Yeah.
And, so you're the reason that they're there, right? And you're the reason they're hanging around. They wouldn't be coming back. So they're probably going to listen to the things. Ralph, they're there because of you. And they're listening because of you. And if they don't want to listen to that particular segment because doesn't apply to them, they're going to skip it, but they're going to come back, so that you don't have to worry about that. We're the reason that they're there and they're hanging around.
Yeah. Rich says, I can still get good info from Podcast 101. I remember since it's Super Bowl, you know what's weird? You can't say Super Bowl. You have to say the big game because Super Bowl is trademarked or something.
Well, now you're going to get sued.
I know, that's it. But what's his name? Bill Belichick, who's, at the time was considered one of the best coaches ever. And they asked him, like, what do you do? And he goes, oh, every year we start off with here's how you tackle. He's like, we go through the 101 stuff because you think you got it. And then you go back like, oh, that's right. Go for their feet, because that's what they're using to run. Dan says, not sure about the audience, Ralph, but I think as podcasters, often we think audiences are separate when they can be both. For example, I'm an individual who's also a business owner. Yep, that's true too.
There you
go. It's good to be reminded, Jeff says, best practices are best practices for a reason. Yeah. And then, this will be fun. We can have dueling Glens. Craig from AI Goes to College. He says, be yourself. And of course, don't be boring. So,
don't be boring.
There you go. And Glenn's got the shirt to prove it. There you go.
The shirt.
So keep that in mind. And Ralph says, yeah, I agree. The issue is that I don't want to lose those people. And this is where I use the book analogy. where not every chapter in every book is like a winner. You're like, okay, that didn't really apply to me. And it's not until I get to like the second chapter and maybe halfway through the third that I go, this is wasting my time. So as long as you can keep that ratio, like because you got a 5-day-a-week show. So if 3 of those are good and 2 of those are not bad, just don't apply to me, then maybe you'll keep people. When you get to 4 to 1, that's when people are going to be like, and that's, I always say it's the hardest part of podcasting, one of them, because every part of it is hard, is right. You got to know your why, you got to know your who, but it's the what. What am I going to talk about that's going to educate or entertain the who while getting them to my why? And it's that what when you go, well, like for me, I think of Kim Craggy, I think of Glenn, I think of Ken Blanchard, I think of all these people that listen. And when I go, was this going to entertain or educate everybody? And there are times that I'm like, no, actually, Ken's going to be really bored with this one. I'm like, okay. And then it's when you're like, well, they're not all winners for everybody. I do my best, but it's hard. And that's where, sometimes I remember Joe Pardo did a show and he attracted a completely different audience than he wanted. And he was like, well, I could redo my content because obviously it's not working, but I do have an audience. So let's find out what these people want and give it to them. And he kind of was already doing that. Hence, that's why they were, coming to a show. But it's tricky. It's one of the things that I also have found out is if you listen to the School of Podcasting, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/survey25 because it's 2025, is I think you attract people like yourself. If we wanted to get into the secret, like attracts like, right, that whole 9 yards. But it's weird because I don't ask a date range. I ask, how old are you? And it's like, oh, it's all people 40 and up. When I started the School of Podcasting, I thought it'd be a bunch of 30-year-old entrepreneurs trying to, use podcasting for their business. But a 30-year-old doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say, oh, man, the guy did a total Fonzie. He's like, what's a Fonzie? It's like that's some sort of drink. I don't know. So, you kind of attract those, I think, that are like you. Because I know a lot when we show up for, lunch with Dave every Friday at the School of Podcasting, there are many times when we have some variety, but a lot of it's, people in their 50s and 40s and things like that. So keep that in mind. Let's see. Then they were talking about maybe Ralph could do a Monday is tax day, Tuesday is that. I'm not sure about that because, again, on one hand, I will say, look, I love Jordan Harbinger, but if I'm short on time, I'm going to the Friday show because that's Feedback Friday, and it's like Dear Abby on acid. See, right there. Nobody knows who Dear Abby is. I did because I grew it. You know what I mean?
I know. Yeah, I know.
You knew, but like a 30-year-old's like, who's Abby? What, Downtown Abbey? What? So, but it's an advice column with really, like at times, really, like I remember the one, it was somebody's stepdad and made a peephole or something like that. It was just, then they're asking Jordan, like, what do I do? And a lot of his answers are, well, first get therapy.
Call the police.
But I listened to that Friday show. And so on one hand, that can work. But we're also like, if Monday is tax day and Tuesday is this day, and when I've seen that back in the day when I was playing bars, and every time we'd have a bar, and all of a sudden they changed, and now it's like Monday's country day, Tuesday's mud wrestling, Wednesday's comedy, and Friday's rock, and you're like, oh well, let's start the clock because people want to go where everybody knows their name, and the person that likes comedy may not like mud wrestling, and they definitely don't like country, but they love rock. And so where that bar used to get people coming in 3 days a week, now they're coming in once a week. So it's I don't know. What do you think on that strategy,
I would prefer that you do segments in the show. I would prefer that the episode has different segments in it. He said earlier, Ralph said he's doing 45-minute show on one topic. That would bore me to death because I get bored. And that's why Jamie and I do so many segments in the show. Plus, it's like it's like Dave, you're on stage doing your rock thing at a bar, and I don't like this song, but I know in another 3 minutes I'm going to get a different one.
Right.
Okay, same thing with your show, right? They know they don't like this segment, or this segment's just, they already know all this stuff. They're going to get a new segment very shortly, so they're not bailing on the episode. They're continuing with the episodes because they know something else is coming. And you train them that way. If you redo your show and you include a bunch of different segments, they're going to know. And we keep our segments the same. So Monday, we have a segment, a question, first world problems, where our auditors bitch about life, and we review those and just have fun with them. On Friday, we do really bad ads, our most popular segment for the last 15 years. You were part of really bad ads.
Yes, I remember
where listeners submit bad Craigslist ads about a horse for sale, and we make fun of them and give away prizes. But we do those at the same time every week and the same days every week. So listeners come to expect, they know what's coming, right, on certain days. So they know what segments they want to listen to. And then the other stuff, they hang around because they want to listen to Jamie and I.
Yeah.
Why they're there.
Well, it's funny because I was listening to the New Media Show with Rob Greenlee and Todd Cochran. Todd, love Todd.
They were both on. Oh my gosh.
And that's their show. And they have said multiple times that their audience has said, like, we appreciate it when you bring in a guest, but like, we kind of appreciate it more when it's just you two arguing, And it's funny because at the end of the show, they spent not a lot of time, like a minute, going, "Hey, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, we'd love to have you." Blah blah blah. I'm like, did you not just say like 10 minutes ago that your audience doesn't like it when you have guests?
But I'll tell you why we have guests, okay? We've been told that a million times over the years, so it could just be Jamie and I, an hour a day. But the problem with that is the content is difficult. It makes it harder on us. When we have a guest, it's 15 minutes we don't have to come up with content for. It's kind of like your show, right? If you were doing School of Podcasting, you have to come up with all the content on days you don't have guests. And that's a lot harder work than the day you have guests. So
well, that's why there's the question of the month.
Yeah.
And it was funny because then I couldn't come up with a question of the month that so I started doing repeats, but there are times, or because of my podcast stories. Why do I have because of my podcast stories? Because I got tired of telling people, really, you should start a podcast. Like, you will not be amazed. You will be amazed at what happens when you start a podcast. So what's another way to do that? Have somebody go like, Ralph, I need to play Ralph's. Ralph did one in a Lunch with Dave that he's getting a deal with, or might have a deal, I should say, with Intuit, the people that make Quicken. Like, that's a big deal, So, and I'm like, look what happened to Ralph. Why? Because he started a podcast, and that's just my kind of passive aggressive way of saying, really, you should do this. It's fun, that whole 9 yards. Dan says for his show with movies, not everyone likes Westerns. I assume they just skip the Western movie episode and come back next time for a World War II movie. Yeah, so it is hard to...
Yet he probably sees in his stats that that's not true. Because, again, they're there to hear his take on whatever it is. That's why they're there. I think we underestimate our importance to our own show. I think that's a common thing that hosts do. You know what I mean? It's kind of the imposter syndrome thing where they're not really there for me. They're there for the guests. Well, that's not true, right? If they're a regular listener and they subscribe to your show, they're there for you. If they're popping in because they want to listen to the guest and then they're bopping back out, they weren't there for you. They were there for the guest. But if they're subscribed and they're listening to you every week or every 2 weeks or whatever, every day in our case, then they're there for us. That's why they're there. It's one of the biggest misconceptions that podcasters have.
I agree with that to one little point. Okay. And that's where I've heard, I'm not making this up. I listened to a 17-minute apology that started the show. And I won't say who the show was, but it's a podcast about podcasting. And for 17 minutes, and because they were doing seasons, which I don't know about you, Glenn, I'm on season 1, episode 900.
Yeah, I'm still on season 1, 3,600 episodes later.
Yeah. But apparently she didn't do a season finale. And I was like, wait, is that a thing now? Like, we have to do a season finale? Like, we have to have a big wrap up or whatever, and it just went on. And there was a part of me that was like, I'm not sure we're all, like, I'll give you an example. Friday night, this is how I party. This is how I roll. You want to have a good time? You hang out with Dave Jackson on Friday because we're going to Walmart and we're doing grocery shopping. That's how I party. And I have a routine. And I went to my phone And in fact, I'm going to do it now just to see. And I pulled up Podcast Guru because this show uses Podcasting 2.0. So I list on my 2.0. Nope, there is no Podcasting 2.0 show. And it was really weird. So my thought was, I hope everything's okay because these guys don't miss. And if they do, they announce it. So that's the key. But you have your routines that go through. And wow, I've totally lost my train of thought. See, that's it. 16, his brain is going already.
People do listen at a certain time of the day.
Yeah. Thank
for
you.
a certain podcast. Like I know, like I always joke about I shower with you on Monday mornings, and that's still true, right? You and Jim, and I'm in the shower with you too. It's kind of like crowded in there now. But that's when I listen. And so when you don't have an episode over the weekend, I'm like, what am I going to listen to in the shower on Monday morning? In our case with the Daily Show, they have, if it's not out by 1:00 in the afternoon, I hear about it because people listen at a certain time to that show. Sometimes the next morning, sometimes later that day. At work, they know when our show comes out and they listen. So people listen to, and we're all creatures of habit, right? So we all listen to certain shows at certain times. This is also a reason why I think it's so hard, and I'm guilty of this. This is why I think it's hard to get new listeners to subscribe to your show, because it's a commitment. Me as a listener, when I think about subscribing to the new show, I mentally go through the game of, do I have time and when would I listen? And is it worth it? Right. So those three things you're thinking about as a listener, your listeners are thinking about the same thing. Is this worth my time? When would I do it? And do I have the bandwidth to do it? So that's hard. And that's the reason I think it's getting more difficult to get subscribers to shows. One, it is a little more crowded space than when you and I started.
Yeah.
But also because they have a ton of choices to listen to now. It's not just podcasts, or it's not just radio. It's not just, it's everything now.
Right.
So there's a ton more choices. So, and they're going to determine when in their week they have time to listen to your show. And if they determine, well, I don't have time, or this is just too much of a commitment, it's overwhelming. With the Daily Show, it's got to be even worse. Yeah. So it's just overwhelming, and that's why I think people don't subscribe, is because of the overwhelmingness of it all.
Well, that's it. So, thank you. You got me back on point, which was, you don't underestimate your influence. I remember I had a client, and I said, "Well, what kind of gear do you have?" He's like, "Well, I've got the PodTrack P4, and then I just bought the Rodecaster." And I'm like, well, wait, you already had a recording interface. So like, why did you buy the Rodecaster? Like, you don't need one of these. And he's like, oh, you said it was cool. And I was like, that guy just spent $600 because I said something was cool. I was like, holy cow, I got to be careful with that.
Dave, that is your fault too.
So you don't underestimate your influence. But don't do a 17-minute commercial. But yeah, it's a little tricky on that. And that's where, again, and when you can be consistent, I always say consistency is key, but it's also key to have consistently good content, because yes. I'd rather have a late show. Like so Podcasting 2.0 right now is MIA. All right, if they show up on Monday and it's a good show, I don't care. But if maybe they just weren't ready on Friday to do their normal show, so they didn't. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to. Now in that case, I actually pay them streaming satoshis, but that's so they're not going to get my 13 cents this week, because there's nothing there. But when you can be consistent, that's a big key.
I support a lot of people on Patreon, YouTubers too. By the way, YouTube's the same thing. They come for the content, stay for the host, right? If we're watching a travel show and you don't like the people doing the travel show, you're not going to hang around. I don't care where they go. So it's the same thing. But if they become inconsistent and I'm actually donating through Patreon and now I'm not getting any content, I'm out. I'm not hanging around.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna. Craig has a question that I have to now find. I favorited it. Here it is. So he says, I'm thinking about. He had a show. It's still online. It's called Live Well and Flourish. Where, are you ready for this, Craig? He helps you live well and flourish. All right. Wow. It's so you would think like you don't even have to market this, because who doesn't want to live well and flourish? But you do. I'm thinking of bringing it back with a slightly different focus and perhaps a new name. Any thoughts on how to do this well? Number one, announce it. So let people know that, hey, I want to thank you so much for being a Live Well and Flourish listener. In about 2 weeks, we're going to do a rebrand. Now, we're not changing a whole lot. Just think of it as Kentucky Fried Chicken is now KFC. It's the same restaurant, same greasy food, same place, just a different logo and a brand. So we're going to change that. We're going to mix it up a little bit. So let people know, because otherwise they're going to pull up their phone and all of a sudden there's a new piece of artwork and they go, I didn't subscribe to that. How'd that get in there? My phone's been hacked. So you got to let them know. And then if you are changing, this is where, as always, every podcast, it depends. But are you changing the website? Like if it's Live Well and Flourish, but now it's Flourishing with Craig or whatever, can you still use livewellandflourish.com? If you're going to say, no, that doesn't apply anymore, then you need a new website. And then it's really tricky. That's where things get ugly, because if you want, like, you can take your old shows and put them into a new website, but Google's looking at the old website. And so you might want to have both for a bit and kind of send everybody from old website to new website just to keep your SEO. Hopefully, I know, back in the day, I would use PowerPress. There's nothing wrong with that. But my feed was on WordPress, and I do not do that anymore because I have a love-hate relationship with WordPress. So
We all do.
yeah. And so I remember for the longest time, my first show was called the Musician Cyber Cooler, which became the Musician's Cooler, which became the Marketing Musician. And all of those, my feed was feeds.feedburner.com/mcaller. It even had a typo in it. I forgot an O. And I was like, well, it's too late now. People are subscribed. And I could have fixed it. But so nobody cares about the feed, but you have to care about the feed. But just realize nobody sees that. People at Libsyn, we had a thing called a slug. And it would be like Libsyn.feed.whatever. And so somebody would put like Dave Show. And then they were convinced, because their audience wasn't growing, that this thing that nobody sees, it's not public, it's only for apps. I need to change that to Dave Jackson Power Hour. And it changed so much. And we would tell them, oh, if you change that, by the way, you're going to break your show. Like, everybody is tuned into your feed A, and you're going to make feed A, feed B with no redirect. So you're going to start from zero. You're going to blow it all up. So everything you have right now is going to go away. Are you 100% sure you understand this? This is a bad idea. And they would go, oh yeah, yes, please change it. And then we would change it. And the next week they're like, hey, all my downloads are gone. And you're like, oh, you're killing it. So we took away the ability to change your slug, because people love to obsess over things that they shouldn't obsess over. Because the alternative is, I don't know, go talk to your audience and find out what they want and give it to them.
Well, that's when people ask about changing the brand, the name of the show, I always ask, are you doing this for you or the listener? Why are you doing this? Is it for you because you think it's bad, or is it, like that particular title is a good title. So why are you changing it? Are you changing the show completely? Is it a completely different show? In which case, then everything Dave said just applies. That's how you make the change. If you're doing the same show and changing the title, then where's the plus there? What are you gaining by doing that? Yeah. When you already have a good title that says exactly what the show is, are you now going to put a title in that's kind of vague? Why are you doing it is the question. Yeah. And is your attitude going to change about the show just because you changed the title? All right. So if you stopped doing the show before, what was the reason you stopped doing the show before, and what has changed now that you won't stop doing it in 6 months? Again, I think like a business person. I'm always looking, and I realize a lot of people do podcasts for hobbies. And Dave and I do podcasts for hobbies. By the way, the podcasts that we've done for hobbies probably are not active anymore. And the ones we do that we actually still make money on, we're still doing. So, there are hobby podcasters, but my point is, are you doing it for you, or are you doing it for them? Right. And do you have the bandwidth to rebrand it and to do it and to keep doing it and be consistent? So I always ask those hard questions, because those are the hard questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're in business, right? When we're doing things. Anytime you write a business plan, it's the same thing. Even if you're doing a show as a hobby, you should have a plan.
Yeah. Brad says in December, I rebranded my daily Bible study podcast from Voice of God. So to let's see if he says what he changed it to. Maybe I shouldn't change the name. It might just be better just to shift the tagline. Taglines are great. That's an easy one. I saw one yesterday. Somebody was doing a show called Ask Sarah, and she's like, which artwork is better? And I'm like, well, for me, that one's easy. The one where the name is the biggest, like, because your artwork's going to get to be really, really tiny. Yeah. And so, so I said, and add a tagline, because Ask Sarah about what? I'm like, that's a great place to let the audience know what you're doing and what it's about. Craig says, good question, Glenn. I was focusing on downloads rather than on the process and the small differences I could make. Sounds new agey, I know. Nah, it sounds, we all, it's one of those things where it's a question that stumps a lot of people, which is, how are you going to measure your success? And people look at me and go, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, how are you going to measure your success? And they go, downloads. Like, duh. Like, what else is there? And I'm like, no, there are a lot of other things, I just put out a new episode of Building a Better Dave. That's therapy. That's $7 a month for therapy. It's just me. I don't care if anybody listens to that. I do love the fact that I've been doing it for a while. I can go back and I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about that. I love
the fact that you're saving money and you're your own therapist. I love that idea.
Well, there was
$7 a lot cheaper than a therapy session.
Yeah, well, it's on Libsyn. It's on the $7 plan, so I get my stats. I'm like, I don't care where my audience is. It's just, and what's really weird, that show has, I'm lucky. Oh, that's interesting. I'm getting an error message in Captivate. Continue. Okay, so we just lost. Who did we lose? Oh, we don't care. But some, as long as it's not YouTube. I think we lost our connection to X. Yay. But that show has, that show has the smallest audience of any show I do. And yet it's the one I get the most people go, hey, when's a new Better Dave coming out? When's a new Better Dave coming out? I'm like, really? I'm like I did one where it was just simply my car would not start because it was 10 degrees outside. And I was like, it dawned on me that it had been probably 20 years since I had been in a car that wouldn't start, and I can't spray ether into the carburetor because there aren't any carburetors anymore.
Yeah, you try.
And I was like, I had no idea what to do. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to document that.
Well, it's interesting because downloads, as you know, how I feel about that. Horses in the Morning's our most popular show. Excuse me. It's probably 60% of our revenue. It's not 60% of our downloads in the network. That show gets thousands of downloads a day, but not tens of thousands.
Right.
But it's the most profitable show, one, because it's daily, but two, because we have the most active, engaged audience of all the shows. They are people, all the patrons are there because of Horses in the Morning. They're not there for any of the other 31 shows. And I know because I ask them why they joined and what they listen to. So we know what every one of them, why they joined. But it's because they're the active, engaged group. Because if Jamie and I say we use this product, go out and buy it, they go out and buy it.
Yeah.
And that's, so it's not always the downloads. We have one show that we do the show for the trade show for the horse world. So it's the Wholesalers Meet Retailers trade show. It's where retailers go to find products. We do the company that runs that show. We do their show. So it's geared toward retailers. So they get wholesalers on to talk about their products, and it's geared toward retailers. It gets about 500 downloads an episode. But it's the right 500 people because they're retailers listening to it. It's never going to get 2,000 because there aren't 2,000 retailers. But it's the right audience. So
that's the key.
That's the key. And how engaged your audience is.
Yeah. Brad said he changed the Daily Bible podcast to Daily Bible Refresh and kept the old website. Let me share my screen and what I did, because we're going through a rebrand right now. That's my Slack. Isn't that catchy? But at podcast website tips, this is now going to be kind of the official podcast of Podpage. And so you can see where on the episode on the left, that's where, again, if you want to go listen to Mark from Podcast Branding, and then you can see there's an episode called This is Where We Change the Name and Surveys. And so I've started to go back and change the artwork to match, but you can see this one still says your podcast website. So which is why when you go up here, in theory, at least I was playing with this yesterday. Nope. At one point I had this to where it didn't show the artwork. It just showed the list of names. But eventually I will update all the artwork, and that's really I could get away with not doing that because I have the episode that says this is where we changed the name. So if somebody goes, wait, what? But I'm not going to go back and re-record episodes and change the intro. But I might change I did change the trailer to have the new logo. But this is one of those things where if you got the time, okay, sure, I could go back and put in the new intro that says welcome to Daily Podcast Tips. But I don't have time for that. And I don't know that it matters because people aren't there for the intro. It's, and it's not that big of a shift between podcast website tips and your podcast website. So, and I just realized I need to change this at the top of this. I still have the old thing at the top of the episodes page, but it's,
Can we
you know,
talk about artwork? One of my pet peeves.
oh yeah,
Yeah, we actually have a whole guidelines written out for our shows because now I work for a bigger company. They have artists, right? Which I always got it done before, but now I have to train each one of those that comes in how to do podcast artwork. My biggest complaint is, and you see it all the time, these people say, oh, how about my artwork? And I have to resist from posting on those posts because the name of the show is the smallest thing.
right.
On the thing, and they just don't get the fact that it's going to be 125 or 150 pixels by 150 pixels, and I can't read it on my podcast player.
Yeah.
That your artwork there is excellent because it says it's big, it's bold, it doesn't clutter it up with your face, right?
Right.
That's another thing that bothers me is non-celebrities putting their own faces on. So yeah, I don't know. Bigger, the name needs to be big. You need to be able to read it when it's tiny on your player. And it's the biggest mistake that people doing artwork for podcasts make.
Yeah. It's, and we don't need a picture of a microphone.
No.
I saw the,
maybe we did when we started 16 years ago, but not anymore. Yeah.
When, what was the movie I just saw? A Flight Risk with Mark Wahlberg in it. It was a good flick. And if you look at the poster of that, there is no picture of a camera on that poster. Like there's just, we know it's a movie. We know what it is. We don't need that. So,
well, you figure they're seeing your brand on a podcast player. So kind of getting that it is a podcast.
Yeah. Ralph has another question, and that is, once we're done with Craig, then how do you decide what time it is to release your show, and does it matter? Well, if you want to listen, Rob Walsh from Libsyn in the latest episode of The Feed, and I believe this is it from January 28th, and that is, if this isn't it, yes, what is the best day of the week to publish a podcast based on data? And he goes into it, and there are things like if I'm doing a local show, I might want to talk about what's happening this weekend on Wednesday, because you got to give people time to get tickets and find out who's available and things like that. But I also, I listened to Podcasting 2.0 on Friday because that's when they put it out. But other than that, I'm trying to think of, I just listened to a episode of the Geologic podcast with my buddy George Robb, and oh my gosh, it's from 2 episodes ago. I'm behind. Okay. I listened. What else did I listen to? I did listen to Pod News Weekly Review. Now that's the latest one, but most of the stuff I listen to is at least a week old. I have my A list of people, but then when that's gone, I go into stuff, and I just found a new show. There's a guy, I've known him for years. We call him the Shan Man. He's a radio guy that's a podcaster, great guy, great tips. And I realized he rebranded his show to the Podcast Therapist. And I was like, oh, I love the Shan Man. I need to go do that. But that's a guy, I have a list of podcasts about podcasting. In this case, I'm using Pocket Casts, unless you're using Podcasting 2.0 stuff, in which case I listen to Podcast Guru. That's a whole other thing. And for the record, that's really inconvenient. I'm about, as much as like I love Podcasting 2.0, there are a couple things over there that needs a little tweaking. If they don't tweak them, I'm tired of jumping back and forth between apps. But I don't know, Glenn, does it matter to you when you, as a listener?
The most important thing is it's consistent, right? It's the same time when it comes out every time, because I know when this show comes out, right? I know when Ask the Podcast Coach comes out. I know it's going to be available for me for Monday morning, right? I know when my shows come out, so I can kind of plan around it. People have a schedule. They plan around the release of your show. So I say, yeah, you're right about there are certain circumstances, right, where like Wednesday you're going to do what's coming up at the weekend here in town. You're going to do that on a Wednesday. Wouldn't make sense to do it on Sunday, right? So
Right.
there are certain exceptions to that. For the most part, though, we when we do our twice a month shows, we don't let shows start weekly anymore, by the way, because they fade too fast. They get burned out too quick. The hosts do. So we
Mm.
start them twice a month. We've experimented over the last 10,000 episodes we've done. We've determined that we can't really develop an audience monthly. We were never able to make that work, but twice a month you could. So we always say you got to be the same 2 days every month. We're not so much on times as we are days. So most of our shows start the 10th or the 25th or the 1st or the 15th. So that's the day so that listeners know on that days, those shows are going to come out. And so it's a certain time, a certain day every month, and that they know they're going to have it. I listen to a hiking podcast that our friend Mighty Blue does, and I know that on Thursday morning it's going to be available for me, and I can listen to it sometime on Thursday. So I think consistency is more important than the exact when. People are going to listen when they listen, but they're going to also know that when you're late.
Yeah. Oh, but that's actually a good thing. When you wake up, you're like, hey, like, where's the show? I would
Where's the
much
show?
rather have
Yeah.
rather have that than nobody cares, right? Rich Graham says, holy smokes, the Sham Man was on Jeff C. shows. Yes, and that's where I was like, oh, see, this is the thing I kind of hate about YouTube. I used to watch the Sham Man all the time on YouTube, and I am finding, for me, once I wade through the 37 gallons of shorts that I don't want to watch, like, I have to go in and go, show me my subscriptions. And even that, I'm like, where's, even Jeff's show for a while, I had to go back and like, what the heck? Where did Jeff go? So in my opinion, YouTube is doing a really bad job of giving me the things that I said, I want more of this. And so when I saw the Sham Man, I was like, I used to watch his stuff all the time on YouTube. What happened? Well, part of it is, and he did a really short episode. So I talked about apologies. His was short, sweet, and to the point. And he basically said, hey, I may not be publishing as frequently as I used to. My parents are getting old, and I got to help my parents. And I love my parents. And he told some really nice stories about his parents, and that was it. And I was like, it was cool because A, stories always work, and B, he's not going to have anybody complain. What do you mean your dad's 80? I want a show, right? And then SP says, but do you watch streaming shows the same way? There are some. I know there was a show called The Night Agent on Netflix.
Second season just came out, Dave.
And I just binged the whole thing.
Did you?
And yeah, and it was so good at the end where, there's always that one cliffhanger. You're like, crap. And then you look up and you have like 1.5 seconds to figure out if you're going to watch the next episode, and it starts and you're like, all right, one more, just one more. I got to go to bed.
That show's really good at that too.
Yeah. So, but there are like for me, Squid Game, I love the first season. The second season, I quit 3/4 of the way through the first episode. That I'm like, either I need to go back and do a recap, or this is starting really slow. And I was like, so, in the same way, I met Vanna White's brother, Chip.
I just did a show with him for our auditors.
Yeah. So
Fun
I love this concept. So it's Vanna White's brother interviewing other celebrity siblings. Like,
Perfect.
okay, let's talk to, I'm just going to make some up. Like maybe it's Tom Hanks's brother, or, whatever, Demi Lovato's sisters.
He's done parrots and cousins and kids.
Yeah. And I told him, I said, here's the thing. When I talked to him at Podfest, I said, you've got me to click. I said, because I want to hear, it's an interesting concept. It's information I can't get anyplace else, and it's unique. I said, so you'll have my first click. I said, the question is going to be, can you get me to listen to the second episode? I said, because the concept is intriguing. I want to hear it. But super nice guy. Really nice. And it was funny because I said, like, when your sister's Vanna White, is it just like her job? Like, oh yeah, my sister's, she's a I don't know what you would call her. She's a letter turner,
a host, a presenter. I don't know.
Yeah, co-host, I think would be a better one, and he's like, yeah, it's just, and he said she's super, generous and kind. And, so she hasn't like, turned into a diva, but, that was one where I was like, it's great to have a hook, but that'll get me to listen to once. Can you get me to listen twice?
And
So I
I
haven't.
wonder with a show like that, and I don't know that he's been doing it long enough to get this information. I wonder if a show like that, if you're going to get more people coming in and out because they only are going to listen to the people they actually know, right? So it's a sibling of somebody they're aware of, or if they've never heard of them, are they going to listen to that episode? Or are they going to come in and out of that one and really pick and choose episodes? I don't know. It's a good
Yeah,
question.
Lane says, I listen to so many different podcasts that I'm going to fill my listening with whatever is there. I don't look for a specific show on a specific day. Yeah, me neither. It's just like, hey, what am I listening to today? And then I have Pocket Casts. Well, there are some shows, like if you're like a show I definitely want to listen to, you are added to the up next list. And so whatever, I just go to the up next list and go there. And if that ever gets empty, and it rarely does, then I will go into shows that haven't been added to up next. And like, okay, let's go to the podcasting list. Oh, look. And that's where titles really come into play. So if it's just like episode 16, interview with Jim Schmoopy, I'm like, I don't know who Jim is. And I don't care that it's episode 16. But if it's like Jim Schmoopy turns dog poop into gold, I'm like, oh, I got to hear about that. So that's an old Steve Martin joke. But anyway, yeah, if
Hey,
you,
Dave, I know we get talking. Did we forget to do the halftime stuff?
have we done, is it halftime already? It is halftime already. Holy
Yeah.
cow. Well, it is. So
This is what happens when Dave and I get together.
it really is.
We'll close
So
the bar.
that's it. So yeah, as soon as I find my button, there we go. Except, oh, you know what? This is what happens when you have Glenn on at the beginning. I was sitting there going through all this stuff, and I was like, I rewound Mark, but I didn't rewind this. So we'll just sit here and watch Dave. And this okay, Ecamm. I'm clicking on a button that said, if I click on the number, I can just do this. There we go. We need to thank our awesome supporters. We really, really do appreciate those people. And you can be an awesome supporter by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And this show is brought to you by theschoolofpodcasting.com, where you can get step-by-step courses, unlimited coaching. Just had somebody sign up and they're like, this really is unlimited coaching. And I'm like, yes, it's unlimited coaching. Like there's no catch. There's no catch. And a really awesome community. Use the coupon code COACH. And remember, that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Right now, if you go to our website at askthepodcastcoach.com, that is using Podpage. And we just rolled out a /newsletter feature. So now instead of saying, oh, just go to the website.com, the newsletter's on the sidebar, just click there, you can sign up. You can just go to my website.com/newsletter. And this, I can't wait to see how this is going to be. We rolled out an achievement badge. So like if I wanted to say #1 podcast by people named Dave, I could put that at the top of my page. So I can't wait, because I'm sure I expect to see a lot of people going top 10 podcast based on listen notes. I'm sure I'm going to see a lot of that.
There's no verification of those badges.
No. So, 5 million downloads. We're also using Ecamm right now. And if you want to check it out, askthepodcastcoach.com/Ecamm. And Ecamm has 2 M's because it's good. It really is. I love Ecamm. And then he's not here now, but if you're like, oh, where's Jim? Well, Jim is over at theaverageguy.tv. Jim right now is being crazy and he's running, I think it's a mile, but he goes up and down a flight of stairs 41 times. And I was like, that was me. I'm like, is someone putting a gun to your head? But it's, I'm like, okay, but he'll be back next week. And now it's time. Now, Glenn, if this comes up to be you, we're going to spin again. But the wheel o' names, will it be, Greg over at Indie Drop-In, or Jody Krangle, or there's Craig from AI Goes to College? We will find out. And if it lands on Glenn, we will spin it again. And I will laugh. Nope, it's not. It's going to be Ed Sullivan from Sonic Cupcake. So if you are a person that is tired of editing their stuff, you can hire Ed Sullivan at soniccupcake.com. He's a good guy, and he's a good editor. He's just a good guy in general. So keep that in mind. And so Glenn, that would have been fun if it had been you. But
I've heard my name a few times. You need to get the guy off there. I heard he's a jerk.
But this is always a train wreck of Dave getting back. Oh, because I have to hit this button. I'm like, where'd the See, I'm out of my tempo.
Ralph
Here,
said his badge would be endorsed by God.
that's it. I like it. So if you find the show is saving you time, saving you money, maybe it's even making you think, who knows, because it's saving you headaches and it's keeping you educated. Well, then again, it's super simple. AskThePodcastCoach.com/awesome. And thanks to everybody today for the super chats, the birthday wishes and all. I really appreciate that. So, yeah. Let's see. I thought Ralph had another question. Oh no, we talked about that. Favorite day.
Can
Yeah,
I
and
bring
then
something up that I'd love to talk about?
yes, let's do that.
This is the most common question I've been getting lately
Oh
is how
yeah.
much should I charge for an advertisement, right?
Yes.
If you got your first advertiser, I've seen this pop up on Facebook too, but it's the most common one I get is how much you should charge. And that's a tough one because you're really throwing a dart at the wall and hoping to find the right number. What I did when I first started was I looked at the magazines in my space, the ones
Mm.
who were closest to what I do, and I looked at their ad rates. And then I undercut them by a little bit, is how I started. And it's not going to be as much at the beginning as it is later, right? We're charging a lot more now than we did 15 years ago. But I take a look at if there are other podcasts in the space that have advertising, whatever else you can find in your space that has advertising, because that's what the advertisers are going to be used to paying. We do flat rates, so we're not doing cost per thousand because we're very niche. We couldn't get away with that. I think I was
Yes.
maybe the first one to do that, actually. And we still do flat rate. So I take a look at what are other people charging in our space, whether it's magazines or banner ads or whatever it is, because most of that's public. You can find most of that information on websites. They publish it. Or I've written to companies and faked like I was a sponsor and asked, and they send it to you. And that's how I kind of determined what our first ad rates were going to be years ago. And it maybe started out at $50 an ad back then, and now we're at $400, right? So it's a lot different than it was back then. And all of our shows are a little bit different too, depending on the size of the audience or the quality of the audience, or what the show is. So, but that's how I determined it. I don't know. What would you tell somebody when determining ad rates?
More than you think. It is because I usually hear people and they'll be like, well, what if I charge them like $10 an episode? I'm like, no. And again, as always, it depends. But yeah, I remember the first time you were on the School of Podcasting with the magazine tip and don't go for a full page ad. Find the little baby ones in the back.
Right.
And there's a great reason for that because, like you said, you just call and say, how much is it to advertise? And so you call whatever horse magazine you're looking at and you see all these ads in the back, if they don't have it listed, you call the magazine and say, hey, how much is it to advertise a little square in the bottom of your back page? And they go, oh, it's whatever, $50, $100, whatever. Then you just undercut them. And then if I remember right, you then contacted the people that had the little squares in the back because they have a budget. And then you come in and say, oh, by the way, I have your audience over here and it's cheaper than the magazine because I know what the magazine costs. And I was like, the man is brilliant.
Well, and they had a budget, but they also don't have an ad agency, right?
Yeah.
So I was always looking, if your full page ads will have an ad agency, anything less than a half a page probably doesn't.
Right.
So I was always looking for that size company that I didn't have to deal with the ad agency, which are going to want to do CPMs and they won't want to talk to me, right? I've since found that that's not true either. They will still advertise with us. We have Chewy and we have Purina and we have those companies now, and we're still charging flat rates. We're not doing CPM. So that's how I started, was really going to those magazines and then undercutting them a little bit. And by the way, surprisingly, you'll pay a lot even for a horse magazine for a quarter page ad. It's still going to be $1,000 a month. It's crazy money.
Yeah.
Another
strategy from the book, Profit from Your Podcast. Turn your listeners into a livelihood. And I got this full disclosure from Jessica Kufferman, Hall of Fame podcaster, Jessica Kufferman. And I call it the high-low game, where you go, so it's like, what are you going to charge? Well, $40. Okay, well, that's not enough. How much? What if it was $80? And you're like, well, I don't. And then you finally go up to like, okay, $115. Oh, that's too much because I want the sponsor to come back. I don't want them for just one time, and they've got to make, return on their investment. So go down to where you feel uncomfortable, and you're probably in the right range, because so many people, now if you want to do the whole like, hey, your first buy is, 30% discount because you're just trying this, but keep in mind that when you renew, it's going to be this. I'm not sure if that's a great strategy, but I just know in most cases, I was in a group once with Mighty Networks, and they were talking to a bunch of content creators, and the CEO was like, I don't know why, but every content creator undersells himself. And somebody else was like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking about $5 a month. And she goes, I rest my case.
There you go.
Because my favorite was, because you run into a problem. One of the reasons I've raised my prices over the years is I turned into the Walmart of podcasting, whether I wanted to or not, because there are people that'll charge you, $7,000 to launch your podcast. Okay. But I was at $49 a month, and they're like, wait a minute, aren't you in the Hall of Fame? I'm like, yeah, but I like to help people. But I got to the point where my price was so much lower than everybody else that people are like, well, this guy can't be any good.
Can't be worth it. Yeah.
Can't be worth it. And I had
True.
when I first launched, it was $5 a month for the School of Podcasting. And I had a friend call me up, Marcus Couch, and he said, Dave, can you name me anything of value on the internet for $5? And I was like, no. And he goes, exactly. And so I raised my price to 20. It was weird. I quadrupled my price and got more customers. And it wasn't until, what was weird is I had people that were paying me $20 a month and still not doing anything. Like they would give me $20 a month and do nothing. Like they'd watch half. I was
probably one of those.
Yeah, but they were watching like half of the planning your podcast course, and then and I'm like, well, my business model was have people start a podcast, go out, be successful, and then people are like, wow, that's really cool. How'd you learn how to podcast? And they'd go, Dave. That was the plan. And when people weren't making podcasts, I was like, okay, this is not working. And so when I raised my price to 50, then I finally had people that started making podcasts, because, now we're getting into a little bit of a pain point, and then they graduate and then become podcast consultants. They don't point people at Dave. And that's completely understandable, because you've built a relationship with your audience. So yeah, I've birthed many my competition that way, and then I've just had
back that up with a perfect example. I've done some consulting recently for mostly people getting into networks, and they contact me and ask what my rate is, and I don't have a set rate because I always know I undercharge, and so I tell them, pay me what you think I'm worth at the end, and they always pay me about double what I would have charged them. So there you go.
Well, this is
and
where
the other thing about ads is you do want to raise them every year. I made that mistake.
Yeah.
I didn't raise the ad rate every year, and I should have. A little bit every year is better than coming back 5 years later and saying, hey, I got to bump you double now because I should have done it all along.
Well, and if you're not, another way to maybe find a number, and this comes from, if you're not watching Shark Tank, you should at least a couple episodes. It's a good one. Is when somebody goes, well, how much does it cost to advertise on your show? And I always go, well, what's your customer acquisition cost? And if they go, whatever it is, I'm like, okay. And then, because now I know what they're looking to get back, and I want to come in lower than that number. And then, and then don't forget too, the bundle, right? Well, it's X amount of money for me to mention it in the show. If you'd like me to put a link in the show notes, I can do that. I can also mention it in the newsletter. So we've got the, mention on a website, mention in the podcast, and mention in the newsletter. Oh, by the way, right now, for the low price of blank, you can get in all three with a minimum purchase of 3 months. And that's the other thing, Glenn. What's a minimum time frame for you for ads?
6 months. Partly because most of our shows are twice a month, and I believe that they have to hear it 7 times for it to be effective. And I tell my sponsors that you're wasting your money if you do anything less than 6 months. That's 12 ads, and that's enough repetition. In marketing, it used to be that people had to hear, when you and I started marketing, it used to be that people had to hear things 3 times for it to sink in. And that's not true with all the clutter anymore. It's 7 to 10 times for it to sink in. So anything less than 6 months is a waste of their money. They're not hearing it enough for it to become ingrained in there. Todd said ad buyers need to understand how podcasting is so much more powerful than main media. Well, that's been my battle for the last 16 years. And one of the ways we do that is through surveys. So last year, Todd, you'll be happy to hear this. Our surveys, we do them big surveys every 2 years, and we get about 400 responses from listeners. And every year, it's been 90% of the listeners have bought a product that a host has recommended within the last year. 25% have bought a product because of an ad they saw in a magazine. So we use those surveys to convince media or buyers that our people are that much more engaged. By the way, our salespeople for the company who sell ads for magazines hate that, because they don't like seeing that statistic, but it's true. 90%. 65% have bought more than 3 products in the last year off of host recommended ads. That's a huge number.
Yeah. And it's powerful, says Todd the Gator. Yeah. There is a book. I have it on my kitchen. I bought something. I met Justin Moore at an event for, it's not Joe Pardo. It's Joe. Oh, crap. Anyway, used to run Content Marketing Institute. But I met him at an event in Cleveland, and he was writing the book then. And I said, dude, when that comes out, I'm going to have you on the show, but it's called Sponsor Magnet. I have not read it yet because it's a paper book, and I need to buy either the audiobook or the Kindle.
Give me both.
The only reason I have physical books is I hold them up occasionally to the camera. It's
I can't tell you, 20 years since I've read a physical book.
Yeah, I don't know why it is. I'm just not,
Well, we're audio people.
Yeah, and the Kindle is so I can highlight it, and then there's a way you can go in and online and see just the parts that you highlighted, and that's always great to do. Yeah.
Our surveys did show too that people tend to be there's the middle 20 to 30% that are both, but people tend to be readers or listeners. So you still have your readers of the magazines, that don't listen to anything, and then you have your listeners like us who listen to everything, Audible books, we listen to radio, we listen to podcasts, but we don't read. It's the reason that on our magazines, that we started putting players on our magazines for every article that's there. And we do a separate podcast now just for the articles. So it's just reading the articles. That's what the podcast is. By the way, they get 5,000 to 10,000 downloads a month.
And this is that the
people
thing?
Just hit and play. And by the way, AI voice reads the articles because they're so good now. We don't have to waste resources on it anymore, having people read the articles. And we use Murph.ai for that. And it's an excellent for reading. It's gotten so good. We have very technical terms in the health world, of horses and health, very technical, long names and things. And it gets them almost all right. It's very good. It's called Murph.ai.
And so this basically, you put it on your website and it reads your blog posts?
Yeah, to read the article, like on the magazine article, but we also through Captivate, we also do an RSS feed for just the articles. So and then what we do is we sell pre-roll ads for those. We sell pre-roll ads against all of those. So there'll be a player actually on the website that you could play the article instead of listen to it. So you come to the article and you go, I can play it and listen and do something else while I listen. Or you're subscribing to that particular feed and you're just listening to the articles. And then we put pre-roll ads, which is nice because we sell those by the month and we can constantly resell them. So
interesting. Murph sounds like something from a bad 80s movie, like a cop. You know what I mean? And his ex-wife is upset with him, and she's like, oh, Murph, I don't know.
I don't know what it means, actually. We experimented with a bunch of them in the early days, 11 Labs and all of those. And this was also one of the most affordable ones because, we might put in 40 articles in a month. So, we just paste the articles in and it takes a couple 60 seconds and we have the output. And then we plug it in, and then through Captivate, we do the pre-rolls and the bumpers and everything automated through Captivate. So it just streamlined the whole process. So it takes somebody that works for the magazine about an hour a month to do the inputs.
Huh. Very interesting. Any other kind of AI thing that you're doing over there? It's one of those things where I play with AI a little here and there, but there are times when I just said, well, you'll hear it on Monday. I had somebody comment And it was one of the, I was like, man, that's a different comment. But you got to realize, you've said it a million times, right? They come for the host. Don't let AI come up with an outline that takes you out of it. And somebody actually said, Dave, I know you're using AI and stuff. I kind of miss the disorganized Dave where you were just talking to us. And I was like, that's really
the ADD
interesting.
Dave.
Yeah, they want me. I'm like, well, I can do more tangents if you'd like. But it was to me, I took that as really good feedback. Now, again, that's one person, but that's something I'm like, I got to pay attention to that. That is something, because I tell everybody this, that look, AI is amazing. It does some really cool stuff. Just don't let it scrub you out of your show, because we get enamored with the like, ooh, looky, because it did. I mean, I copied and pasted so much stuff from this report from YouTube, but it was all over the place. So I took all these, I said, here, this is from an article from YouTube about why content, blah, blah, blah. Can you organize this? And it came out with like, here are 5 points with 4 bullet points. And I was like, this is exactly, wow, this is, because I was trying to do that in my brain, and my brain's like, I don't think so.
Well,
And
I think what it's meant to do, it's not meant to replace you or your personality. It's meant to help you save time,
yeah,
right? So we use it for ad scripts. So a lot of times the advertiser have trouble even coming up with their own ad script because they've never done it before for a podcast. So we can use it to give an outline for an ad script. Then we alter it and tweak it to sound like us, and we get their approval on it. We use it also, doing a lot of meetings with potential advertisers and stuff. We're using something called, there's a lot of meeting notes now where you use Zoom and it'll take meeting notes for you. Our company bought something called Fathom, and oh my God, Dave, I don't have to write anything down ever again. It's better at meeting notes than I ever was, because I don't know about you, but I suck at meeting notes. Yeah, because I'm always too busy concentrating on the meeting and not writing things down, right? So Fathom is great. I also use it for our history segments, for segments we do in the show. It saves me so much time to ask ChatGPT to find out the sources, then me go to the sources to actually write it. But I'm cutting my time down to do a 10-minute history segment. I can do in a quarter of the time now than I used to happen to find my own sources. It knows those sources. It's not writing it for me. It's helping me write it. And I think that's the difference.
Perplexity.ai, I think, is another one that I will ask it, because it automatically gives you the sources. And then I will go look at the sources to see if it's AI. I'm like, I want to make sure that eventually there's an author name on one of these, but yeah, it's, I want to try it. I'm not this weekend because I got birthday stuff going on, but Daniel J. Lewis and I were kind of brainstorming, and I said I would love to have it take an episode and like critique it. Like, hey, here's the so we'll get it transcribed, and then say, because if you think about it, this is what I was like, I'm going to put myself out of a job. Like, here's the transcript from the show. How did we do when it comes to getting to the point? How did we do? And which is weird, because I'm not sure, because I'm asking it to think, or at least, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not sure how, but I want to try that, to use ChatGPT or insert your tool of just like, how could I have made, because half the time this is my prompt. Like anything that goes out for Pod Page, it always goes through, like I will write it first, and then I go, I'm writing a blurb for a newsletter. It's about our new feature called blah, blah, blah. Here's what the feature does, and here's what I did. Blink. And then I just, my really extensive prompt that I put into this is make it better. That's it. Just make this better. And it'll be like, boom. And it's always nothing mind-boggling. I was like, oh, you know what? That's a better phrase, or this is a better way to have it. Like, oh, you know what? This does work better as bullet points. Stuff like that. So it's my stuff with a little bit of polish, and that seems to work, at least for me. But it, like I said, the one listener was like, "No, we kind of like disorganized Dave." So I'm like, okay.
Poor Dave's working so hard to stay on track.
That's it. Chris said, Chris Stone from castahead.net said, sponsor magnet will make you money if you want to work with brands. Well, that's right up your alley, Glenn. Highly recommended, he says. And Chris Stone is a guy that I trust. So if he says highly recommended, I might actually, well, what I'm going to do, because Jeff C. mentioned it's now available on Kindle, and I'm like, okay.
Oh, good. Is it available on audiobook? Because
Let's
I'm gonna
see.
read.
It's what's it called again? Branding's. I've already said it 3 times. Sponsor Magnet. So
We'll have to look that up because,
it,
like Dave, I have severe ADD, and reading, an actual book is even on Kindle is kind of tough.
the only time I do it is if I'm on a plane, and what I do now,
Because you have nothing else to do.
nothing. I'm completely focused on the chair in front of me. Yeah, Sponsor Magnet at least is not coming up on Audible as we speak, but yeah, it's what I've done in the past is you can ask the woman in the tube from Amazon to read a Kindle book to you, and she's better than she used to be, and really should be much better than, because we know what AI voices sound like, but there are times when
It's getting good now.
yeah, the only thing that I hate is when you then go to the Kindle book. I tried once with Whisper Sync, because there's a thing where if you listen to the audiobook and the Kindle book, they're supposed to stay in sync. And that doesn't work if you have Lexi read that for you. And I was like, but it was an audiobook, and at first you're like, oh man, this sounds like a robot. And then about 32 seconds in, you're like, this isn't that bad. You kind of get used to it. Just like, that cousin that talks like this, I'm not poking fun. I have a cousin that talks like this. And after a while, his S's just go away because that's how he says his S's. And you don't notice it anymore. So same thing with, what's her name? Good old Lexi. She's going to sound like a robot if you want to have her. And it's just, what's her name? Read the book, such and such from my Kindle. I think we'll do that. Although, I don't know about you. Do you have a woman in the tube from Amazon in your house, Glenn?
No. Jennifer won't allow it.
It's, it is spying on you all the time, even though it says, but
It's not. Yeah.
yeah,
Your phone is spying on you all the time.
yeah. Rich says, I read the Kindle with the audio. Only way for me to keep focused and retain. There's an idea. Wait a minute. And I'll have to find a link. Chris and Jeff over at Dealcasters. We interviewed him on Dealcasters. Another great interview that's in my watch later thing on YouTube is they interviewed the guy from Magi. And Magi is this tool it's like a suite of AI tools. So like you can use ChatGPT and you can use whatever, Larry, Curly, Mo, all the different models out there. And one of them, because Chris is a member of the School of Podcasting, he took a still image and AI made it a movie. Like it was really, I was like, wait, what? And then he showed it to us and I was like, that's crazy. So AI is, again, spooky and scary and cool all at the same time. So I've popped my popcorn and I'm ready to go. Dan says there's an open source tool out there called Storyteller that tries to be like WhisperSync for any ebook or audiobook. Interesting.
Write that one down.
Yeah, I'm going to say, I have to check that out. How are we doing we'll look at that. I was like, we need another question. No, we don't. It's 2 minutes till. So
Dave, I'm wondering, and I think you could do this. I'm not sure. I'm wondering if you could use something like Fathom while you're doing your show here, and it would write a more complete set of takeaways and notes, because Fathom does all of that stuff. It writes the takeaways, it writes the notes, it writes who's supposed to do what after. I'm wondering what that would look like if you did it on a live podcast like this.
That's interesting, because I know it works with Zoom, and I think it works with Google Meet. And the other thing we haven't mentioned, it's free. They have a paid version, but and this makes me worried. Everything I need it for is free.
Yeah, but they're companies like ours. They're charging big bucks for them to use it, so they are making money through companies like ours.
Yeah,
so
because there was
sold by the license.
Yeah, there was a service called Volley that I loved, and they came out with a paid version, and everybody didn't need the stuff in the paid version, and they went out of business because free. When your customers don't pay you anything, it's hard to stay in business. And luckily, they went away, found some more VC money, came back, adjusted and we're all just like, take our money. Like, this is a great service. So, well, Glenn, thanks for keeping the seat warm for Jim.
Thanks for inviting me.
And you can find Glenn, of course, over at horseradionetwork.com. Did I say that at the beginning? I thought I did. It's been on the screen, the whole thing. And luckily, there's no typo in it. That would have been embarrassing. But
and my daily show is Horses in the Morning. That's the one I host.
There you go. And I'll have links. I'll have to look them up. Glenn's been on the School of Podcasting no less than 6 times, something like that. So he's, I know at one point I still have a page. I think it's schoolofpodcasting.com/Glenn with 2 N's. I think takes you to the page that has all of Glenn's appearances because I refer to them all the time. So he always brings good stuff, as you did today. So thank you, my friend. On the School of Podcasting, I'm interviewing another veteran. You're going to have a lot of this year because I've got a lot of friends that have been doing it 15, 20 years. That like, hey, I got reflections on 20 years. And in this case, it's Danny Pena from Gamertag Radio. And this guy's a walking because of my podcast story. When you have the president of governments, contacting you because of your podcast, that's a cool thing to do. He's also played video games with Bill Gates. He got retweeted by President Obama. That doesn't suck. So that's coming up on the School of Podcasting. And of course, next week, Jim will be back in the chair for another fun-filled episode of Ask the Podcast Coach. Thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co. Thanks to Dan over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Thanks to everybody for the fun-filled super chats. Holy cow. Thank you for that. And we will see you. See, this is where I'm awful at this. I don't know how you do this live. Sometimes I'm really good at the walk-up. I'm like, I got another 5 seconds. All right, there we go. Thanks for tuning in to Ask the Podcast Coach. We'll see you next week. Take care. Go podcasting.
Happy birthday, Dave.
Thanks, sir.